Today is the 35th day of the counting of the Omer. And so again, we pray that the Father will give us our daily bread, that He'll give us the word that we need today to encourage us and empower us to do His will. So today we have another double portion called Behar and Bechukotai. Behar means on the mountain. Bechukotai means in my statutes. And Bechukotai is kind of important to me because that is my birth portion. And I always remember that because basically the message in Bechukotai is, do what I say or you'll die. I keep that in front of me all the time. Do what I say or you'll die. Because there's times I don't want to do what he says. I want to do what I want to do. I want to be George Bailey. I want to do what I want to do. Anyway. But we're going to focus on a topic that's addressed in Behar, which begins in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. We'll read through verse 4. And the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. Of course, this is referring to the shmitah year, the Sabbatical year, the 7th year in a 7-year cycle. When the land was to rest, it was not to be tilled by the owner, and he was not to hire anyone to till it for him. And so what Shabbat was to the people, the 7th day, the shmitah was to the land. Because every 6 days, or on the 7th day, we're to rest. Every 7th year, the land was to rest. And both of these testify that God created everything in 6 days, and then He rested on the 7th. And so, as we're to rest from our labors, the land is to do likewise. And so the laws of the shmitah and the yovel, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, also express that really the land doesn't belong to us, it belongs to its creator. It belongs to God. Psalm 24 says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, right? And so basically the land that He's given to us is on loan to us. It's apples and oranges, but the children that God has given us aren't really our children. They're His children. And we have been placed as stewards to teach, to train, and to guide them until they reach an age of accountability. But ultimately, they are His. And so it is with the land. It is His, and He bequeaths it to us, or He loans it to us in order for it to provide for our needs. So then, that says this. The shmitah, the sabbatical year, speaks to the fact that the Creator cares for His land. He cares for His creation. The soil is literally devoted to God. And so then, during the shmitah, the land is given a rest, but at the same time, in this rest, it is given in service to the poor among His people, and it's given to the animal kingdom. Exodus 23, verse 10. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive groves. And so again, even though the land is given a time to rest, it is still serving, because the Creator of the universe ordained it so. It is still serving His people, the poorest of His people, the animals, because He watches over that which belongs to Him. The sabbatical year teaches us that there is a connection between the people and the land. And I believe this is particularly true where the land of Israel is concerned. I have long believed that there is something in the dirt over there, that when the right people are living on that land, the land responds to those people. And those of you who have been to Israel can testify to that. Without getting too controversial here, when you're on a bus and you're going around touring the land of Israel, you're seeing how green it is and how, things are just being built everywhere. You know when you cross the border. And how do you know you've crossed the border? Because it looks dead. Is that right? Have you been there? All right, David, is that correct? All right. So the land responds to the people. There's something in the dirt that responds to God's people, and particularly when his people honor him. In this portion, it is written, chapter 25, verse 18 and 19. You shall observe my statutes and keep my judgments and perform them, and you will dwell in the land in safety. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell there in safety. And so this connection between the people and the connection they have to the land leads me to this conclusion. If God is concerned for the land, then he is concerned about who dwells in the land. If he's that particular about taking care of his land, so much so that every seventh year to let it rest, and it provide for the poor of my people, it provide for the beasts of the field, those that I've created. If he cares that much for the land, then it really matters who's dwelling on that land. More specifically, if the land is deeded to a certain people, there is a reason for it. And so with that, we read in Genesis chapter 15, verse 7 and 8, what God told Avram. I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So I want to talk just for a moment about the Hebrew word that is translated inherit. We know what that means in English, but there's something in the Hebrew that kind of lends a little bit more depth. Maybe I'll use that word. But the Hebrew word translated inherit is garash. Do you have that to show them? Okay, that's okay. You'll have to use your imagination. How many of you are learning Hebrew? Let me see your hands real quick. The rest of you? I could make stuff up and you'd never know, right? I better not say that. That'll get on YouTube and somebody will run with it. Anyway, there we go. Yirash, Yud, Resh, Shin. Yirash, that's the root word. It means to possess. It means to inherit, but with the notion of removing something so that you can possess it. Dispossessing someone so that you can inherit the land. In other words, conquering. So basically, Avram was asking, how will I know that I'm going to be able to conquer this land? How will I know that my descendants are going to be able to conquer this land? And so the covenant of the pieces that's described for us in Genesis 15 establishes the covenant that God made with Avram in regard to the land, in regard to the fact that he said, I am going to give this land to your people, which means they're going to have to conquer it. And he describes how they're going to go down into Egypt, they're going to serve Egypt for the season, but they're going to come back into this land and, yes, conquer it. That means dispossessing others and taking possession of the land. And so he established this with Avram and with his descendants. And so he says this, same chapter, verse 18. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Just a sidebar, when there have been times when I've been part of different teachings with other folks and conferences and things like that, and from time to time, you put up a map that shows what greater Israel is going to look like in the time of the Messiah. That gives people a lot of heartburn. There are people in this world who lose their minds when they see the land that God has deeded to Abraham and to his descendants, because it stretches all the way into what we now call Iraq. But the point, going back to the point then, is this. He made that covenant with Avram because he had asked the question, how am I going to know that I and my seed are going to be able to conquer and possess this land? And he made that covenant with Avram and with his seed. And then the next verse, I won't read it, lists all the different nations that would be dispossessed from this particular land so that Israel could inherit, possess, conquer the land. Now, that kind of scenario in today's world is looked down upon, it's frowned upon, it's naysayed, and that's genocide, and that's colonialism, and it's this, that, and the other, and yada, 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 yada. So be it. Here's my response to that. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. You speak a universe into existence, cause an earth to be, and do all the things that this planet it provides for us. You call that into existence, and then you can do with it what you want to. But until you do that, hush. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. It is his to do with as he wishes, to deed it to whoever he wants to deed it to. Amen? Where the land of Israel is concerned, he determined that it belonged to Abraham and to his seed. And when they have not dwelt in that land, the land has responded negatively. Doesn't produce anything, or not much. But when they have returned to the land, it responds positively. I just gave you an example of that. When you're in the land of Israel, things are just blossoming and blooming and getting green, and there's vegetation, there's cities, there's buildings, there's all this. And there's a group of people in this world who cannot stand that. And I'm not going to get political here. Well, maybe just a little. There are people in this world who cannot stand the fact that his word is coming to pass, because when the Lord builds up Zion, then he will appear in his glory. And see, that's what the adversary doesn't want to happen, because he knows when God is building up his kingdom on earth through his people, in his people, it is a definite sign that he is about to take the throne in Jerusalem. And there are people in this world who cannot stand the thought of that. Now, maybe they don't believe that, but the one who influences them knows that. And so when God is doing something like that, working with who he sees fit to work with, there will always be those people who come against that. But the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. So when the people who were supposed to be in the land have returned to the land begins to respond to that. Now, prophetically speaking, we haven't seen the fruition of this. We've only seen a measure of it. And it's been growing decade after decade. But we still haven't seen the fruition of it. So I want to read you a passage from Amos chapter 9 that speaks of the fruition of what we're talking about here. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows seed. The mountains shall drip with sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. I will bring back the captives of my people Israel. They shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink wine from them. They shall also make gardens and eat fruit from them. I will plant them in their land, and no longer shall they be pulled up from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. So, yeah, go ahead. So it's, I guess we had a little bit of a power outage or something. Hopefully they'll get the lights back up back there so don't feel like I'm on a stage in a movie theater somewhere. Let's see what we can do, gentlemen, as soon as we can. I'll keep going. Sorry that some of you have been thrown into the dark. There are some people who are being a light in the darkness down here. All right. All right, but what Amos is describing here is the plowing season and the sowing season are kind of overlapping. That's how bountiful it is going to be. And I would dare say one of the main reasons is because the Messiah is going to be here by this time. Anyway, this is describing a time when the people of God are being faithful to the covenant. The land, consequently, is responding to the people. It's responding in like manner. They're producing the kind of fruit they're supposed to produce. And so likewise, the land is producing the fruit that it is ordained to produce. But I want you to notice that this is happening at a time when God is bringing back the captives. He's bringing back those who have been, quote unquote, lost, who've been scattered, who've been spread out through the nations. He's bringing back those that he describes as being captives, and they are being planted in the land, and he says, no longer to be plucked up out of the land ever again. There comes a point when he says, that's enough, this is it. There's no one else who's going to come and remove you from this place. I'm planting you here to grow and to thrive. And so then, Again, if God is concerned for the land by providing the shmitah, by providing a sabbatical year, a time for the land to rest, if he's that concerned about the welfare of the land, then it matters who dwells on the land. That's a big, important point. It really matters to him who's dwelling on that land. So it brings me to this point, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 8. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement. And you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all of the inhabitants. I'm going to start over. Is that all right? All right, anyway. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all of your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee or a yovel for you, and each of you, and that's what I want to emphasize, each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. So every 50th year, 7 sabbatical cycles, we have a yovel, a jubilee, and this was proclaimed in the 50th year. By the way, the primary meaning of yovel is a trumpet or a ram's horn. In other words, a shofar. That's the primary meaning of this word yovel. But literally, we could say then that in the 50th year, it is the year of the ram's horn for you. We're going to get to why that is interesting in just a moment. But the etymology of this word yovel, it's derived from the idea of bringing something home. Something that hasn't been where it's supposed to be. It's been off, it's been disconnected, it's been lost, it's been at a distance, what have you. And so yovel is the idea of bringing something home, a valuable piece of property, something that is valuable to its owner. It's being returned to its proper place. And so the point here then is the sounding of the shofar, in particular in this 50th year. That meant that all Hebrew slaves, for instance, were released. They, along with their families, were released, they were emancipated, and they were sent back to their proper place. In Exodus 19, the reason, at least in part, that we hear the sounding of the shofar from the top of the mountain, when God came down on top of Mount Sinai, the sound of the shofar was heard, and it was getting louder and louder and louder, and the people were there at the foot of the mountain. One of the reasons that happens is because God was proclaiming, as it were, that his people had been liberated from their bondage. They had been emancipated. They were no longer slaves. They were no longer servants to Egypt, and they had been released. It was the year of release for them, and thus the shofar is sounded, the yovel is sounded. But it also, in the 50th year, signified that the individual was being returned to his possession. This is just kind of a sidebar. In Hebrew, when you read it, that every person will return, or every man will return to his possession. The word returned is vashavtim. And if you look at it in Hebrew, it's got the word Shabbat in it, which would imply what? Rest. And so there's this thematic connection with returning to resting from labor, to be at rest from the bondage and all the things that pertain to being in the exile. And so then, every man was to return to his possession, and those who had lost their inheritance had it returned, or they returned to it. And so then, in Amos chapter 9, you know what's going on? It's a grand jubilee. It's when the people, all of the people, have been returned to their land. They have returned to their inheritance. Those who had lost it, those who had been captives, have been freed. Now, The Hebrew term. Are y'all still out there? All right. The Hebrew term that is translated possession. I want to show you this Hebrew word. Do we have that? All right, very good. Achuzah. Achuzah. It means a possession. This is the feminine form of the word. With the hay on the end, it makes it feminine. But the root word means this: to seize something, to grasp something, to take hold of it. And along with that, it is implied you take hold of it with the intention of never letting go of it. Think of something that is very precious to you, or someone that is very precious to you. And so the idea is you seize it, you grab hold of it, you take hold of it with the idea, I'm never letting go. That's the idea behind this word. And so then, to use this word as the possession for the people, it was to be something that they were to grab hold of with the idea of never letting go of it. The land of Israel in Genesis chapter 17 is described as being an eternal possession, the same word, for Abraham and for his seed. And so they were to never let go of it. It was something that they were to value in that way. So then, if it was true for the nation, then it would be true for all the different families that comprise that nation who had an inheritance that was deeded to them, and then that inheritance was passed down to future generations. It was not to be relinquished. It was something that that family was always to hold on to. They were to hold on to it with all of their might, to be very zealous for it. The land was allotted to the family and intended to be a permanent heritage. And so then we could say this: there's a connection between the land of Israel and the people of Israel. But there was to be a similar connection to that inheritance, that property, and the family who possessed it. It was something that God himself had deeded to them, and they were to consider it as being very valuable, so much so that they would never let it go. And so the land and the family were entwined with one another. Now, there are those, we must be having a thunderstorm somewhere. Anyway, there are those who obviously fell onto hard times, and they were compelled to relinquish the land. They didn't sell it. They were simply leasing it so that others could grow crops on it. Because once again, the land belongs to the Lord. In fact, he said this in verse 23. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. Again, this goes back to the idea that the land belongs to God. You and I are stewards, we're settlers. We're the people that he says, I'm going to let you use this land. Now, are you messing with me, or we're having an issue? Okay. So we're having an issue, but I'm going to stay on the issue, okay? Is that all right? All right, so I'm not going to try to be distracted by that anymore. All right, so again, the true owner of all the earth is the one who created it. And you and I are those stewards who've been given opportunity, privilege to care for the land in reverence to the true owner, because he truly cares for it. So then, said all that to say this. When Ahab goes to Naboth and he says, I want you to sell me your vineyard, what does Naboth say? The Lord forbid that I give the inheritance of my fathers to you. In other words, he was very determined not to relinquish the inheritance that God had entrusted to him. So remember, this word achuzah, it means, yes, possession, but with the idea you seize something, you grab hold of something, with the idea I'm never going to let it go. I'm going to take hold of it now and keep it close to me. Here's a point of interest. When Abraham was told to take Isaac and present him as a burnt offering, how valuable do you think his son Isaac was to him? Not only was it his son, it was the promise. This was the personification of the promise that God had made to him. But he's asked to take him and to present him on the offering as a burnt to present him on the altar as a burnt offering. But we know the story in Genesis chapter 22. Instead of Isaac having to be that burnt offering, there is a ram that was caught in the thicket. How? By its horns. The word that is translated caught in Genesis chapter 22 is, guess what word? It's the masculine form of the word achuzah. It's achaz. It's like the thicket reached out and grabbed that ram by its horns and would not let go. You see, he's the creator of all things, and the creation responds to his word and his command. The thicket grabbed hold of the ram and wouldn't let go, which then made a miracle possible. Not just for Abraham, but for subsequent generations. Because that episode, and Abraham taking Isaac, and Isaac hauling the wood on his back to the top, asking, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And God will provide himself a lamb. All of that is a picture of something that is miraculous for you and me. And it's life-altering for you and for me, right? And it hinges on a ram being caught in the thicket by its horns. So in that light, I'm going to share with you a very interesting tradition as it relates to that particular ram, more specifically, its horns that were caught in the thicket. Abraham has to take the ram out of the thicket. He has to slaughter the ram. So what happens to the horns? Here's the tradition. That those were passed down, and that when the children of Israel come to Mount Sinai in Exodus 19, that the sound of the shofar that is growing louder and louder and louder, tradition says, is one of those ram's horns that we find in Genesis chapter 22. So what about the other one? Well, the tradition is the other one is what you and I might regard as the last trump. The one that is to be sounded when Israel is being regathered in the final redemption. In fact, in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 14, it says that the Lord God will blow the shofar, that he will blow the horn at the time of the redemption. Now, whether the tradition is accurate or not, I will say this. The concept points us to Yeshua. Amen. The concept points us to the one who died in the stead of you and me. He's the lamb that God is going to provide. And I wish I had time to get into what Abraham saw, but the point here is this. Through Yeshua, our deliverance from bondage has been secured. And that deliverance from bondage makes our redemption possible, which then in turn means this. In him and through him, you and I have been given an inheritance. We have been given an inheritance. There's so much to come for God's people. But we have an inheritance here and now. And if we are in Messiah, according to Paul, we are Abraham's seed. And can you finish the verse for me? And heirs according to the promise. The promise that was given to who? To Abraham. Abraham, I'm giving this land to you and to your seed as an eternal possession. We have an inheritance right here and now. Yes, I know the kingdom is coming, but the kingdom is here as well, right? Do you believe that, right? All right. The king is coming, but in and through his people, the king is already at work right now. So we have an inheritance. We have a possession. We are heirs according to the promise. And so then, that should mean this. Realizing that we would be the kind of people who would seize hold of it. That we would grab hold of it with the intent of never letting it go. Again, obviously, there were people in Israel who were compelled to let go because, well, and this is the way our Jewish friends see it anyway, the people who were compelled to let go of it did not fully obey God's command. Or we'll put it this way, they mismanaged their inheritance. Judaism teaches that the disobedient would initially lose his money, and then he would be forced to sell his movable property. If that person remained unrepentant, then he would be forced to sell his inheritance and his house and he would have to borrow from others with interest. If he still remained unrepentant, he would eventually have to sell himself to another Israelite as an Eved, or worse, to a non-Israelite, to one of the nations. And if the last option or scenario occurred, if he had to sell himself to a non-Israelite, he eventually might become the servant of idols. And so then, God felt so strongly about this notion regarding the inheritance and the possession that he had given to his people that he instituted a safeguard that allowed for restoration should your inheritance be lost. Should you fall into that scenario that we just described where you were compelled as a result or consequence of disobedience or what have you, nevertheless, he felt so strongly about this idea of possession and inheritance and a heritage that he put this safeguard in that there would be a time, a year of release, that things would revert back to the way he had ordained them to be originally. So then, there's always hope for the lost. There's always hope for what has been lost to be returned. We need to remember that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to suggest to you, is just as much our inheritance as anything tangible that we could think of. The hope that we have, or should have, that our God cares so much for his land and for his people. He's always got a safety net. He's always got a safeguard. He always has a recourse should things go not his way, but our way. Because that's usually what happens when we end up in trouble. We've done things our way. But he makes a way back. So then on one level, the Yovel served as a safeguard against a family losing their inheritance for all time. It provided a safeguard against perpetual poverty. Because if there was no recourse, if there was no release, you just end up being slaves who beget slaves who beget slaves. Which is kind of what happened in Egypt, which is why he had to send a guy named Moses and all those kinds of things that happened, right? But he wants to safeguard against that. And the Yovel served to prevent all of the property of those people who were compelled to lease it, sell it, whatever you want to say, from being accumulated by the hands of just a few people. But on another level, which I think is, at least for me, the greater point, the Yovel demonstrated that the Creator places a premium on redemption and on restoration and on liberty and on being restored back to how things should be according to his plan. And so then God watches over the land, and he watches over those the land is deeded to. He watches over the inheritance of his people, which means he watches over his people. He's zealous for these things. In fact, there's twice that the prophet Zechariah says that the Lord is zealous for Zion. He's zealous for the city of Jerusalem, which is to say that he is zealous for the people, because Zion is not just a place, it's a people, it's a kingdom. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is a concept. When Abraham was on that mountain and he's going to take the knife and he's going to slay his son and offer him as a burnt offering, and the ram is caught in the thicket by its horns, and he takes that ram and he makes that to be the burnt offering. He called the name of the place Yahweh Yireh. Some people say Jehovah Jireh. Yahweh Yireh. Depending on what commentator you read, it means the Lord will be seen, or the Lord will see to it. What will he see to? That everything is put back the way it's supposed to be. You see, when the Messiah rules and reigns from Jerusalem, it is a sign that there has been a year of release, and all the captives of God's people have been restored to their inheritance. And the inheritance has been restored to them. He's putting everything back the way it's supposed to be. So, if he's committed to the land, he's committed to restoring the people to the land. And, get this, he's just as committed to punishing the nations who have held them captive. Ask Pharaoh. Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't bow the knee to the Almighty, so what did God do? Turned him into a beast. For how long? 7 years. He finally bowed the knee. So he is committed to punishing those nations who would hold his people back. So, with that thought in mind, I want to come back to Naboth and his inheritance. So there's going to be a little bit of a teaching within the teaching. So Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard. He said, because it's close to my house. It's like right next to my house. So you've got this great vineyard, and I'm willing to pay you whatever you ask for it. I'll buy you another vineyard that's better than this one. Just sell me this one. Because what I want to do is I want to cut down all of your vines. I want to dig up all of the roots. I want to plow everything under. And I want to turn this magnificent vineyard into a vegetable garden. He would have laid waste to the vines, which means he would have laid waste to the fruit, and he would have uprooted what had taken years, maybe decades, to develop. And now there's nothing wrong with having a vegetable garden. I like vegetable gardens. I wish I had more time to do a vegetable garden. But Naboth didn't have a vegetable garden. He had a vineyard. Now, let's go to Hebrew class again. The word vineyard in Hebrew is kerem. Kerem, which is, there you go, kaf resh mem sofit, kerem. By the way, John the Baptist was born in a place called Ein Kerem, just outside of Jerusalem. It's the spring or the eye of the vineyard. I don't have time to go there. Anyway, kerem is the word for vineyard. And so, as I said earlier, when Ahab came to him with this request, Naboth refused. He stood up to the king and he told the king, no, the Lord forbid that I give the inheritance of my fathers to you. The word that is used, inheritance, here is different than the one I showed you earlier. If we've got that, let's put that on the screen. The word that is used in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 3 is the word nachalet. Nachalet. And this word comes from a root word that means to receive property or to receive a possession. But the etymology of the word is this. Imagine a mountain stream flowing down the mountain, and with it, it comes and it brings things to those who are in the valley, good things. So that's the idea behind this particular word. In fact, the word nachal is also the word for stream, or one of the Hebrew words for stream. So it's the idea again of a mountain stream, and it's flowing from on high, and it's bringing good things down to the people below. That is the word that is used here for inheritance or possession. Things that flow downward. And so, in other words, Naboth had inherited this vineyard from his ancestors. They had cared for it. They had worked the ground. They had done all that was necessary for this vineyard to flourish. And so now it falls to him to make sure that what he has received from those who come before is now passed down to those who will follow after. Do you hear what I'm saying? You and I have received an inheritance. We have received a heritage from the Lord. Sometimes through our parents, sometimes through our grandparents, sometimes through people and from people that have no physical relation to us whatsoever. Nevertheless, however it happened, the Father saw to it that good things were passed down to us. And now it falls to us to make sure that those good things, those things that are virtuous, that are righteous, that are pure, that are holy, those things are passed on to those who will come after us, to these young people that are sitting over here and all through this congregation. This shouldn't be an experience that they are just coming because mom and dad are here. This should be about their learning from mom and dad and from all of us collectively, for them to then take the torch forward and be the people that God uses in their generation. And then if the Messiah tarries, for them to pass it on down to another generation. So all of us have a responsibility that what the Lord has entrusted to us, that we are to grab hold of it, not let go of it, not relinquish it, and be very diligent and very careful to make sure it gets passed down to the next generation intact. Intact. So then, the possession, the inheritance, the heritage obviously can be more than land and property and tangible things. It can be testimonies. It can be principles. It can be these statutes and these ordinances. A righteous legacy that can be passed down. That is an inheritance. That is a possession. That is something that has eternal value. So the Bible's using Naboth's vineyard to kind of make the point for us. And so Naboth refused to relinquish what had been passed down to him from previous generations. And because he said no, Ahab goes home and he sulks and he won't eat and he's pouting and he's throwing a hissy fit. Because there's some people who just cannot handle the word no. Enter Jezebel. Izebel. Her name means Baal exalts, or it can mean she exalts Baal. And what is Baal? It's the epitome of what stands against the God of Israel. This is who Elijah had to confront on Mount Carmel. We'll get to that in just a moment. So Jezebel comes into the picture, and she hears her whiny husband. You can't have a Jezebel unless you have an Ahab. Should I say it again? You can't have a Jezebel unless you have an Ahab. They have to be together. Oh boy, am I tempted to say something right here, but I shall press on. No. Just don't be an Ahab. I'll just leave it at that. Don't be an Ahab. Somebody tells you no, don't go whine. Suck it up and go find another place to plant your vegetable garden, all right? So she comes on the scene, and then she begins to set a snare for Naboth. And she wrote a letter. And by the way, she didn't write it as if it was coming from her. She wrote the letter as if it had been written by her husband. She put his name on it, put his seal on it. In other words, she's doing this without her husband even knowing about it. And she sent this letter that she composed, signed by her husband, sent it to the elders, and told them to make false accusations in order, this is the end result, to have Naboth killed. And so then when Naboth was killed, Ahab went in and he took possession of the vineyard of Naboth, according to chapter 21, 1 Kings, in verse 16. That Hebrew word that he took possession is that word that we were introduced to in Genesis, Garash. How shall I know that I don't inherit it? How do I know I'm going to be able to conquer it? Well, what did Ahab do when Naboth was killed? He went in. Naboth has been dispossessed, and Ahab goes in to conquer it, as it were, and take possession of that vineyard. And then what did he start doing? He started laying waste to the vines and the fruit, digging up years, decades of hard work and effort, and all that under to plant his whatever he wanted to plant. Probably like rhubarb and stuff like that. I don't know. Kale. Beets. And I like those. Anyway. So that's what he did. He conquered his vineyard. But I want you to notice that this did not go unnoticed by the Lord. In fact, you read the text, he sent Elijah the prophet to confront Ahab when he was in the vineyard of Naboth. And he had some very, very strong words to say to Ahab. I'll spare you all that. You can go read that later if you want to, but here's the point. Elijah's confronting Ahab in Naboth's vineyard. That's very interesting. Lots of reasons. First of all, Naboth, the word means fruits, F-R-U-I-T-S. Fruits. But the word Naboth, or the name Naboth, is actually related to the word Navi. In Hebrew, that would be Nun Bet Yud, Navi. Does anybody know what that word means? Prophet. So, in a thematic way, Naboth is the voice of the prophet. No, you can't have my inheritance. Jezebel sets a trap. Naboth is silenced. Ahab comes in and dispossesses Naboth and takes hold of the vineyard of Naboth. And so it's very interesting. And so this is something I was sharing a couple of weeks ago at the prophecy conference. I'm not going to do the whole message, but I do want to introduce this thought to you. The spirit of prophecy is always opposed by the spirit of Jezebel, which I will say is akin to the spirit of idolatry, because that's what she represents. Idolatry, Baal worship, the worship of Ashtaroth. And so the spirit of prophecy is always opposed by the spirit of idolatry, the spirit of Jezebel, as it were. And by the way, let me say this, because I know somebody's thinking it. It's not always a woman. I've met a lot of male Jezebels. Right? It's a spirit, okay? It is a spirit, and it is a spirit of idolatry. And that spirit wants to restrain and ultimately destroy the vineyard. That's what she wanted to do. And then turn it into something else. I want that to percolate for just a moment. This spirit that opposes the spirit of prophecy not only wants to restrain what God is doing in the vineyard, let's put it that way. Not only does it want to destroy the vineyard, but it wants to turn it into something else that looks good. Are you with me here? So this is happening. And I want you to keep in mind that this incident occurred after Elijah had confronted her prophets at Mount Carmel. By the way, the word Carmel means the vineyard of God. Carmel, the vineyard of God. It's not an accident that Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Ashtaroth in God's vineyard, as it were. Why? Because the spirit of idolatry opposes the spirit of prophecy, because the spirit of idolatry wants to seize and take hold with the idea of never letting go of God's vineyard, to destroy it and to turn it into something that was never intended to be. And so that's who Elijah confronts, her prophets, those who came and sat down at her table, ate her food, and then apparently at some point were inspired to go out there and speak on the behalf of her gods. This all happened in the vineyard of God, Mount Carmel. But it was also there that the people of Israel saw that the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Ashtaroth were just a bunch of phonies. They were powerless. They were, at least in Elijah's mind, worthy of mockery. Worthy to be mocked and taunted in front of all these people, so that all the people would see that the gods that they call upon aren't gods at all. They're nothing. And they can cut themselves and they can dance around and they can do all of these things, but nobody's going to answer, because apparently he went on vacation, he said. At one point he says, maybe he's in the bathroom, yell louder. But here's what the people end up saying: the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Why? Because the one who answers by fire, that one is God, right? So when all of this happened and God answered by fire, you know the story, and all of a sudden the prophets of Baal and Ashtaroth said it's time to make an escape. And Elijah says, don't let any of them escape. Put them to the sword. And what did this do? Did it cause Jezebel to say, I quit, throw up the white flag, I'm going home? No. She doubled down. And she got her quill and her parchment out again. She started writing another letter saying to Elijah, if you're not dead by tomorrow, may the gods do to me what have happened to the prophets. Words to that effect. In other words, she sought Elijah's death. Why? Because that spirit, the spirit of idolatry, it opposes the word of the Lord. But she couldn't destroy Elijah, couldn't destroy God's vineyard, so she found another victim, Naboth. Now here's my point. The spirit of idolatry, I will say, is summed up this way. It's the worship of self, what I want. I want the vineyard. I want the vineyard for you, or whatever it is. It's a preference for self. That is at war with the spirit of prophecy. And by prophecy, we don't mean to say we predict things that are going to happen next Tuesday. That's not what we're talking about. Actually, what is the spirit of prophecy? Testimony of Yeshua the Messiah is the spirit of prophecy, right? So everybody who is lifting up the name of Yeshua and exalting him that he might draw all men unto himself, those who are being faithful witnesses of the resurrected Messiah are representative of the spirit of prophecy. Because the spirit of prophecy is it's an energy that God uses to bring forth that he has already determined and ordained, to bring forth the fruit, as it were. And that fruit is to be attractive to those who are drawn to it. So then, the spirit of idolatry is at war with the spirit of prophecy. And so for, a couple of decades now, we've been singing this song, "These Are the Days of Elijah." Right? What's the next line? Declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant being what? Restored. So if these are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord, if these are the days where Moses, that is the Torah, righteousness is being restored, these are days of great trial, of famine, darkness, and sword. I'll put it this way. If these are the days of Elijah, these are also the days of Jezebel. If God, through his people, is raising up and just infusing the body with the spirit of prophecy, that means the spirit of idolatry is going to be there to oppose it. And it's going to try to take what God is doing, to destroy it, to lay waste to the vine, to get rid of the fruit, to uproot it, plow it under, and turn it into something else. In other words, our inheritance. Idolatry, reduced, is a preference for self. Let me read in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Paul says, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves." He leads off with that. And it seems to me that if he leads off with that, I don't think it was a random thought. He had a reason for saying that first. Lovers of themselves. And then he goes into lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And then he adds this, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. I've often pondered, what he had in mind when he said that. I mean, I can certainly see what's on the surface. There are going to be those who have a form of godliness. They put stuff out here for everybody to see, but they deny God's power. And I have to believe that is, they deny God's power to transform them, perhaps, to what they're supposed to be. But I think it also could include the idea that in denying God's power, or the power thereof, depending on the translation, they're opposed to God's power. They're resisting God's power. And then what does Paul say? And from such, turn away. So I've said all of that to bring it back to this. That spirit that opposed the spirit of prophecy wants to seize the possession. It wants to take the inheritance. It wants to destroy it and transform it into something that it was never intended to be. And so then, in our passage that we read earlier, in the year of release, if someone has lost their inheritance, if they have been dispossessed, what happens? They are returned, every man to his possession. Right? But there was something else he said. He also said, and in the year of release, each of you shall return to his families. So here's what I take that to mean. In the year of release, families are restored. And if that's what God wants to do you know what the spirit of idolatry doesn't want to happen? It doesn't want those families to be restored. It wants the vineyard. It wants the inheritance, which is implying future generations. That's why the adversary is so doggedly going after your children and your grandchildren, my children and my grandchildren. That's what the adversary has set his sights on. Because a lot of us are old enough at this point, we're, entrenched in our faith. We know what we believe. We know what the other life has to offer. We're not going back to that, God forbid. But with these young people, they may not have figured all of that out just yet. And so he set his sights on the future generations. He set his sight on the fruit that is growing on these branches that you and I are supposed to be. And he wants to destroy them. He wants to destroy future generations. Because if he can have them now, then he's got the next generation in the bag. So, if that's what we know he's up to, then we need to be the people like Naboth who say, no, you are not going to take the inheritance that the Father has entrusted to me. And if I have to fight you, I will fight you. This possession that has been given to us is to be passed to future generations, to these young people that are sitting over here right now. This isn't all about just us and finding a place for us to fit in. Oh, I just want to find a place where I can fit in. Find a place that'll feed you and your family and will be an environment where you and your family can thrive and grow so that your children will carry on what has been entrusted to you. Find that place. And so this possession, this future, that's our inheritance. That's what we inherited and is what we are duty-bound to pass along to future generations. And so then we are to seize it. We're to grab hold of that and not relinquish it to Jezebel. Now, that spirit is pretty slick, intimidating, unrelenting, and hell-bent on having their way. Don't be an Ahab. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Do not fear them, nor be intimidated. I, the Lord your God, I go before you. I will be as a rear guard to you. We have to have that determination to, this is what the Father has entrusted to me. He's entrusted my children to Beth and to me, and your children, your grandchildren to you and to your family. And so we understand that this is part of our heritage. And we have a responsibility to do everything that God gives us the power to do, to grab hold of that and to not relinquish it, not to turn it over to TikTok and TikTok and Facebook and all that stuff. And iPhones and Androids and don't relinquish it. Let us not relinquish the inheritance the Lord has entrusted to us. So I want to say this. I hope this is how you feel. Where this little vineyard is concerned, we will not relinquish it to Jezebel. We will not relinquish it to Ahab. We will not relinquish to the spirit of idolatry. We will not relinquish it to the ways of the world and the society's trends and their whims and all of that. We will not relinquish that. We won't do it. And if that gives you heartburn, somebody find them some Rolaids. But that's the stand we have to take, folks. And don't think that the adversary isn't going to do every possible thing he can to come against you and your family and this family at large if God is working in you and in your family and in this family at large. Now, if he's not working here, if he's not here, we may as all pack up and go home. Agreed? So, if God's not working in this congregation, if God's not working in my family, if he's not working in your family, can we just say, we'll just pack up and we'll go home? Now, who's ready to pack up and go home? Am I making anybody uncomfortable here? That was kind of my intention. Because I'm very uncomfortable. Because, see, God has told me on more than one occasion, no, you can't have your way. How many of you have heard God tell you, no, you can't have your way? All right, so we're not inclined to pack up and go home. I'm not, because we believe that God is doing something in our families. We believe that God is doing something in this little vineyard. And so we have to be determined. When somebody says, let me do this and let me transform it into that. No. Well, then we'll plot and scheme and do this. No. Because season after season after season, until Messiah returns, you and I are going to have to keep that in the forefront of our mind, that we are going to have to realize that there is an adversary out there who wants to steal, who wants to kill, and who wants to destroy. And so we do not intend to release the vineyard to idolatry and to anything that exalts wickedness. So as I was putting this together early this morning, and I'm thinking about this and praying about it, and Lord, you really want me to say this, and maybe I shouldn't say that, and should I say this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Something that doesn't really happen to me a whole lot happened. And I just felt like that the Lord said that I was to close this way. Hear the word of the Lord. The year of release is coming. Therefore, proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all of its inhabitants. Do not relinquish your inheritance. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bring your descendants from the east and gather your prodigals from the west. I will say to their captors, give them up, and to the strongholds, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. And I will cut off the names of the idols from the land, and I will remove from the land the spirit of uncleanness. For behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun, at the trumpet call. So lift up your voice. It is the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion's hill, salvation, Yeshua, comes. Amen.